I stood outside the dining room and heard them planning to steal my $350,000 condo like they were carving the holiday turkey. They said if they just started receiving mail there, I could never kick them out. I walked in, smiled like a good daughter, and silently sold the house. The morning they arrived with their suitcases, the locks were already changed, and the only thing I left behind was a court date. My name is Nora Jenkins, and I am 37 years old. That number usually implies a certain level of stability, a cementing of the self. But as I navigated my rental sedan through the sludge of a Cleveland winter, I felt anything but solid. The windshield wipers slapped a frantic rhythm against the glass, fighting a losing battle against the wet, heavy snow that turned the suburban streets into gray tunnels. It was December 24th. The GPS on my dashboard glowed with an estimated arrival time of 6:15 in the evening. I was 5 minutes late, a fact that would undoubtedly be noted, filed, and used as ammunition later. I turned onto the street where I grew up. The houses here were sturdy, brick-faced monuments to the American middle class of the 1980s. They sat back on manicured lawns that were now buried under 6 inches of slush. Every porch was illuminated with twinkling lights. Inflatable snowmen waved from driveways. It was a picturesque scene, the kind used in commercials to sell insurance or luxury cars. It was the perfect setting for a family reunion. I pulled into the driveway behind my father's pickup truck. The engine ticked as it cooled. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the warm yellow light spilling from the front bay window of my parents' house. I took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of recycled heat and stale coffee from the rental car. I told myself to be pleasant. I told myself that for the next 48 hours, I could endure the passive-aggressive comments about my career, my single status, and my life in Chicago. I prepared myself to be the dutiful daughter. I stepped out of the car. The cold was immediate and biting. It was a wet cold that seeped through the layers of my wool coat and found the bone. I grabbed my bag from the back seat and walked up the path. The salt crunched beneath my boots. I reached the front door. My hand raised to press the illuminated doorbell. Then I froze. The heavy velvet curtains in the living room were not fully drawn. There was a gap, perhaps 2 inches wide, right at eye level, and through the glass. Sound traveled with surprising clarity. They were loud. They were not speaking in the hushed tones of people preparing a surprise. They were speaking with the brash confidence of people who believed they were alone. I lowered my hand. I leaned in. Just an inch. I saw them. My parents, Gordon and Marlene, were not in the kitchen finishing the Christmas Eve dinner. They were seated in the living room, huddled around the low coffee table. My younger sister, Kara, was there too, resting a hand on her pregnant belly. Her husband, Derek, was leaning forward on the edge of the sofa, his face flushed with intensity. It looked less like a family gathering and more like a war room. "It is just wasted space, Gordon," Derek said. His voice was sharp, cutting through the glass. "She is barely there. I looked at her travel schedule online. She posted it on LinkedIn. She is in the air more than she is on the ground." My father, Gordon, took a sip of his beer. He looked thoughtful. "It is a nice place. Safe neighborhood." "Nice is an understatement," Derek scoffed. "It is a $350,000 condo in the West Loop. Do you know what the appreciation on that property is going to be in 5 years? And she just lets it sit there, gathering dust, while Kara and I are crammed into that 2-bedroom rental with a baby on the way." I stood motionless on the porch. The snow melted on my eyelashes and dripped down my cheek, cold as ice water. They were talking about my home, my sanctuary, the place I had bought with my own money, the down payment scraped together from bonuses and 80-hour work weeks. "She does make too much money for one person." My mother, Marlene, said softly. She was smoothing the tablecloth, her voice carrying a strange, reasonable tone that I knew well. It was the tone she used when she was about to justify something terrible. "It is not right for family to struggle when one person has so much excess. We are a family. We share burdens. We share resources." "Exactly," Derek said, slapping his knee. "But you know Nora. She is selfish. If we ask, she will say no. She will give us some lecture about financial responsibility or the market. So we do not ask, Marlene said. I held my breath. The vapor clouding in front of my face vanished as I stopped exhaling. Marlene smiled. It was a small, tight smile. I looked it up. Derek, the laws in Illinois are very specific. Tenant rights are strong, extremely strong. What are you saying, Marlene? My father asked. I am saying that possession is 9/10 of the law, she replied. If they are in the unit, physically, it is hard to get them out, but to make it official, to make it a civil matter where the police cannot just drag you out, you need to establish residency. Derek looked confused. How do we do that if she does not give us a lease? Marlene leaned in closer to the group. I had to strain to hear her over the wind whistling around the eaves. Mail, my mother said. The single word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. You just need to get mail delivered there. A utility bill, a credit card statement, a bank notice. Once you have mail with your name on it sent to that address, and you have keys, you are a resident, you are not a guest, you are a tenant. I felt a physical blow to my stomach. It was a visceral sensation, as if someone had punched me. My mother, the woman who taught me to write thank you notes and respect my elders, was instructing my brother-in-law on how to become a squatter in my home. She is leaving for Tokyo on the 5th of January, my father said. His voice was deep and final. She told me on the phone last week, it is a 3-week trip for that merger deal she is working on. 3 weeks is plenty of time, Derek said, a grin spreading across his face. We can be moved in by the 7th. We can have the nursery set up by the 10th. But the keys, Kara said. It was the first time she had spoken. Her voice was small, wavering slightly. She won't just give us the keys. Derek? My father laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Nora leaves a spare key under the mat inside the garage. She always has, in case she locks herself out. She thinks she is so smart, but she is predictable. So here is the plan, Gordon continued, outlining it with his hands. Nora goes to Tokyo. You two drive up the next day. You take the key. You move your furniture in. You change the locks immediately. By the time she lands back in Chicago in February, you are established. You have mail. You have the new keys. She cannot kick a pregnant woman and a toddler out into the snow. No judge would sign that order. Change the locks, Derek repeated, savoring the idea. That is genius. That way she cannot even get in to scream at us. She will be angry, Marlene noted, picking at a loose thread on the sofa. But she will get over it. She always does. She craves approval. She will not call the police on her own father. She will not arrest her pregnant sister. She will huff and puff, and then she will accept it. She has the money to rent another place until she cools down. It is for the best, Gordon concluded. Nora needs to learn to share. She's become too hard, too corporate. This will be good for her character, and it saves Kara. I stood there in the dark. The snow was falling harder now, covering my shoulders in a white shroud. I should have been furious. I should have felt the hot, red rage that makes people scream and throw things. I should have barged in there and flipped the table, but I did not. Something strange happened in my brain. It was a shift I recognized from my professional life. I worked in high-level compliance and risk management. My job was to look at disasters, embezzlement, regulatory breaches, data leaks, and fix them. When a crisis hit, I did not panic. I did not cry. I went cold. My heart rate actually slowed down. I dissociated from the emotion and focused entirely on the logistics of the problem. This was no longer my family inside that house. I looked through the window and I did not see a father, a mother, a sister, and a brother-in-law. I saw 4 hostile actors conspiring to commit fraud and theft. I saw a liability. I saw a security breach. My mind began to race, not with questions of why, but with lists of what. Asset, condo, Unit 4B, West Loop, Chicago, market value, $350,000, threat level, Critical. Timeline. Immediate action required. Strategy. Containment and liquidation. I closed my eyes for a second. I visualized the spreadsheet in my head where I tracked my life. I mentally moved the row labeled family from the assets column to the liabilities column. It was a simple accounting adjustment. I took a deep breath of the freezing air. It tasted like metal and ice. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I checked the recording app. It had been running for the last 3 minutes. I had turned it on out of habit when I heard the raised voices, a reflex from years of documenting contentious meetings. I stopped the recording and saved the file. I named it Christmas Eve Discovery. I uploaded it immediately to my encrypted cloud storage. Then, I prepared the mask. I have a specific face I wear for board meetings when I have to deliver bad news. It is polite, attentive, and completely impenetrable. I relaxed my jaw. I smoothed the lines on my forehead. I summoned a smile that was mathematically perfect but emotionally vacant. I was not Nora the daughter anymore. I was Nora the unexpected auditor. And the audit had just begun. I stepped up to the door. I did not ring the bell. Ringing the bell gives people time to compose themselves, to check their reflections in the hall mirror. I raised my fist and knocked, 3 times, hard. Knock, knock, knock. The sound echoed through the wooden door like a judge's gavel. It was the sound of an ending, though they did not know it yet. It was the opening note of a carefully orchestrated demolition. I heard the scramble inside, the hushed whispers, the shifting of bodies. "It is her," Kara whispered loudly. "Act normal," Derek hissed. "Put that away," my mother commanded. I waited exactly 5 seconds, enough time for their hearts to spike, but not enough time for them to fully hide their guilt. I turned the knob. It was unlocked. Of course it was. They were expecting a victim, not an executioner. I pushed the door open. The heat from the house rushed out to meet me, carrying the scent of roasting turkey and pine needles. It was the smell of my childhood, twisted now into something sickly sweet. I stepped onto the entryway rug. I stamped the snow off my boots, deliberately taking my time. I looked up. The 4 of them were frozen in a tableau of forced innocence. Derek was standing too straight by the fireplace. Kara was clutching a throw pillow like a shield. Marlene was smiling so wide it looked painful. Gordon was gripping his beer bottle with white knuckles. The room was silent. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant hum of the refrigerator. They were waiting for me to sense something. They were waiting to see if I knew. I looked at Derek directly in the eyes. I saw the greed there, thinly veiled behind a mask of welcome. I looked at my mother. I saw the calculation. I let the silence stretch for 1 beat too long. I let them sweat in it. Then, I widened my smile. "Merry Christmas," I said. My voice was bright, steady, and completely hollow, and the room remained dead silent. They stared at me, searching my face for a crack, for a sign that I had heard, but I gave them nothing. I was a mirror, reflecting their own deception back at them. "Merry Christmas, Nora," my mother finally choked out, her voice cracking slightly. "You are late," my father grunted, trying to regain his footing. "Traffic," I lied smoothly. I walked further into the room, closing the door behind me. I heard the latch click shut. It sounded like the door of a trap snapping into place. I was inside. The game had started, and they had no idea that they had already lost. The transformation happened so fast it was almost biologically impossible. One moment, they were a huddled mass of conspiracy, their faces sharp with greed and strategy. The next, as I fully entered the radius of the living room light, they dissolved into a soft-focus portrait of suburban warmth. Shoulders dropped, frowns inverted into welcoming smiles. It was a performance that deserved a standing ovation, or perhaps a psychiatric evaluation. My mother, Marlene, was the first to break the tableau. She rushed forward, wiping her hands on her festive apron. She hugged me, but it was not the embrace of a mother greeting a daughter she had not seen in months. It was a frisk. It was a quick, hard squeeze that checked for resistance, checking to see if I was stiff with suspicion. "You look tired, honey," she said. pulling back to inspect my face. "Doesn't she look tired, Gordon?" "Overworked," my father grunted from the sofa. He did not stand up. He gestured vaguely with his beer bottle. "That is the problem with your generation. You chase the dollar so hard you forget to live." I almost laughed. The irony was so thick, I could taste it like the metallic tang of blood in my mouth. Here was a man who had just been plotting to steal a $350,000 asset from me, lecturing me on the futility of chasing money. "It is good to see you, Dad," I said. My voice sounded calm. It sounded like the voice of the Nora they knew. The doormat, the ATM, the fixer. "Let's eat," Marlene announced, clapping her hands. "Everything is getting cold." We moved to the dining room. The table was set with the good china, the plates with the gold rim that were usually reserved for guests who mattered, but the seating arrangement told the real story. At the head of the table sat my father. Opposite him, my mother, on the long side. Facing the window, sat Derek and Kara. They were given the padded chairs, the ones with the armrests, and there, on the other side, isolated and facing the wall, was the folding chair. It was a wooden chair brought up from the basement. It was lower than the others, forcing the sitter to look up at everyone else. It was the chair we used to put the youngest cousin in during Thanksgiving. It was the extra spot. Marlene saw me looking at it. "Oh, sorry, Nora," she said, breezy and unapologetic. "Kara needs the cushion for her back. You know how it is. And Derek has that bad knee." "It is fine," I said. I sat down. The wood was hard and cold against my legs. I sank 3 inches lower than everyone else. It was a power dynamic made physical. They wanted me to feel small. They wanted me to feel like a child. Lucky to be allowed at the adult table, so that when they made their demands, I would be desperate to please them. Dinner began. The turkey was dry. The mashed potatoes were lukewarm. But nobody seemed to care about the food. They were feeding on tension. I watched them eat. I watched Derek shovel food into his mouth with a kind of aggressive entitlement. I watched Kara pick at her green beans, sighing loudly every few minutes, waiting for someone to ask her what was wrong. I decided to wait. I decided to make them work for it. I cut my meat into precise, tiny squares. I chewed slowly. I did not speak. The silence began to curdle. My family hates silence. Silence forces them to think, and thinking leads to guilt, or at least discomfort. Gordon cleared his throat. It was a rumbling sound, like an engine turning over. "So," he started, stabbing a fork into a potato, "how is the big city? Still dangerous?" "It is fine, Dad," I said. "Chicago is a mess," Derek interrupted, speaking with his mouth full. "I saw on the news, carjackings, shootings. I do not know how you live there alone, a woman, by herself. It is irresponsible, really. Here it comes." I thought, the fear-mongering, the setup. "My building has 24-hour security. Derek," I said quietly, "it is very safe." "Security guards sleep," Derek countered, waving his knife. "Cameras break. You are isolated there. Nora, no family around. If something happened to you, we wouldn't know for days." "We worry about you," Marlene chimed in. She reached across the table to pat my hand, but she didn't quite make contact. Her hand hovered, then retracted. "Family should be close. Family should look out for each other." "Speaking of looking out for each other," Gordon said, pivoting the conversation with the subtlety of a sledgehammer, "we have been doing a lot of thinking about the baby." He gestured to Kara's stomach. Kara dropped her fork. She looked up with large, watery eyes. She had perfected this look when she was 12 and wanted my allowance. Now, at 32, it looked grotesque, a caricature of vulnerability. "I am just so stressed, Nora," Kara whispered. Her voice trembled. "The doctor says my blood pressure is up. The apartment. It is so loud. The neighbors upstairs. They party all night. I can't sleep. I am terrified for the baby." "It is a toxic environment," Derek added gravely. "We found mold in the bathroom last week. Black mold. I took a sip of water. I knew for a fact they did not have mold. I paid their rent for 3 months last year when Derek forgot to mail the check. I knew the landlord. He was a meticulous older gentleman who maintained that building better than his own health. That sounds difficult, I said neutrally. Difficult? It is life-threatening, Derek snapped. We need to get her out of there, but the market. You know the market. Interest rates are 7%. Rent is sky high. We are stuck. Gordon leaned forward. This was the pitch. Nora, he said, his voice dropping to a serious, patriarchal baritone. You have been blessed. You have a great career. You have resources. And we are proud of you. But with blessings comes responsibility. Sacrifice, Marlene added softly. That is what family is. Sacrifice. I looked at them. I looked at their expectant faces, and suddenly, my mind was not in the dining room anymore. It was flipping through the pages of a mental ledger I had kept for 20 years. Sacrifice? I remembered being 16, working double shifts at the diner to pay for Kara's prom dress because she deserves to feel like a princess. And my parents were a little short this month. Price tag, $400. I remembered being 22, fresh out of college, handing over my entire signing bonus to Gordon because the transmission on his truck blew out, and he couldn't get to work without it. He promised to pay me back. He never did. Price tag, $3,500. I remembered 3 years ago. Derek's surefire investment in a crypto mining rig that turned out to be a scam. He was facing legal action from the people he had borrowed money from. Who stepped in? Who hired the lawyer? Who settled the debt to keep him out of jail? Price tag, $12,000. I looked at Kara's tear-stained face. Last year, she needed a mental health break because planning her wedding was too stressful. I paid for a week at a resort in Arizona. Price tag, $4,000. The numbers scrolled through my mind like the stock ticker on Times Square. Tuition, bail money, medical bills, down payments on cars that were later repossessed. I had spent my entire adult life buying their love, paying for my seat at this table, and the only thing I had purchased was the right to be asked for more. What are you suggesting, Dad? I asked. I wanted them to say it. I wanted them to put the words in the air where I could catch them. Gordon looked at Marlene. Marlene looked at Derek. We were thinking, Derek said, taking the lead. You are going to Japan, right? For that big project? Yes, I said. 3 weeks. And then you travel again in March. Derek continued. He had done his research. Your condo sits empty. Nora, it sits empty while your sister is breathing in mold spores. We just need a safe place, Kara said, a tear finally escaping and rolling down her cheek. It was a masterpiece of timing. Just until the baby comes, just until we get back on our feet. Your place is so big. You have that guest room you never use, and it is so quiet there. It would only be temporary, Marlene said quickly. We would take care of it, water the plants, dust. It would be safer for you, too. Having someone in the house. You wouldn't even know we were there, Derek lied. We would be ghosts. I stared at the centerpiece, a plastic arrangement of holly and red berries. They didn't just want to stay there. I knew what I had heard through the window. Get mail there, establish residency, change the locks. They weren't asking for a favor. They were asking for permission to rob me. So, I said slowly, you want to move into my apartment while I am in Tokyo? Just to try it out, Gordon said. See if it helps Kara's stress. And if it does? I asked. Well, Gordon shrugged. We figure it out. Maybe you stay in the city during the week, and they take the weekends, or you help them with a down payment on a place nearby later. But right now, this is an emergency. I see, I said. Nora, Kara pleaded. She reached out and touched my arm. Her hand was warm and damp. Please. You wouldn't let us end up on the street, would you? You are the strong one. You always save us. There it was, the trap. You are the strong one. It was the cage they had built for me since birth. If I said no, I was cruel. If I said no, I was abandoning a pregnant woman. If I said no, I was proving that my money had made me cold and heartless. In any other timeline, in any other version of this night, I would have fought. I would have listed the reasons why this was a bad idea. I would have brought up the HOA rules. I would have offered to pay for a hotel instead. And they would have battered me down with guilt until I wrote a check I didn't want to write. But tonight was different. Tonight, I had the recording in my pocket. Tonight, I knew the endgame. I looked at Derek. He was trying to hide a smirk. He thought he had me cornered. I looked at my parents. They wore expressions of righteous expectation. I let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. I took another sip of water. I set the glass down with a deliberate clink against the coaster. My brain was screaming, "Get out! Run! Tell them to go to hell!" But my voice was steady. It was the voice of a compliance officer closing a file. "Okay," I said. The word hung in the air. Simple and devastating. Kara blinked. She hadn't expected it to be this easy. "Okay?" "Yes," I said. I forced a small, tired smile onto my face. "You are right. Family is important. The condo is just sitting there. If it helps Kara and the baby, you should use it." The release of tension in the room was palpable. It was like a balloon deflating. Derek actually slapped the table. "That is fantastic. You see? I told you she would understand." "Oh, Nora!" Marlene cried out, beaming. "I knew you had a good heart. I knew it." Gordon nodded, satisfied. "Good girl. You are doing the right thing." "We will pack light," Derek said, his mind already calculating the square footage. "We will be out before you know it." "Take your time," I said. "I want you to be comfortable." They laughed. They toasted with their beer bottles and wine glasses. They celebrated their victory. They thought they had just secured a $350,000 asset for the price of a guilt trip. They had no idea. I picked up my fork and took a bite of the cold turkey. It tasted like sawdust, but I swallowed it. "Eat up," I thought, looking at them. "Enjoy the meal, because this is the last thing I am ever going to give you." I had not just given them permission to enter my home. I had given them permission to enter a crime scene where they would be the perpetrators. I had just handed them the shovel, and they were so busy celebrating. They didn't realize I was asking them to dig their own graves. "So," Derek said, grinning like a shark, "when can we get the keys?" "I will leave them for you," I said softly. "Everything will be ready," and it would be. Just not in the way they imagined. The drive back to Chicago took 6 hours of white-knuckle focus through a blinding snowstorm that turned the I-90 into a parking lot of red taillights and exhaust fumes. I did not listen to music. I did not listen to podcasts. I drove in silence, the hum of the engine serving as the only backdrop to the replay loop running in my mind. The dinner, the faux concern, the trap snapping shut. I arrived in the West Loop just past 2 a.m, my building, a converted industrial warehouse with exposed brick and iron beams, loomed against the dark sky like a fortress. This was my sanctuary. I had bought it 4 years ago, gutting it and rebuilding it to be the one place on Earth where I had total control, or so I thought. I parked in my assigned spot in the underground garage, the silence of the concrete bunker heavy and damp. I took the elevator up to the 4th floor. When I unlocked my front door, I did not reach for the light switch. This was a habit born from my profession. In compliance and risk management, you learn that light reveals you to the enemy before you can see them. Darkness is an asset. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door, a soft clink that echoed in the emptiness, and walked through the shadows of my hallway. The streetlights from the city filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long skeletal shapes across the hardwood floors. I walked past the kitchen, past the living room with its carefully curated mid-century furniture, and went straight to the utility closet in the back corner of the office. This was the nerve center of the apartment. Inside, the modem blinked with a steady, rhythmic blue light. Next to it sat my personal server and the hub for the security system. My family thought I was just a corporate drone who pushed paper. They knew I worked with computers and rules, but they had no concept of the level of paranoia my job instilled in me. I didn't just have a Ring doorbell. I had a closed-circuit internal monitoring system that backed up to a private cloud server. I installed it 2 years ago after a break-in occurred in the building next door. I had never told my parents about it. To them, cameras were things you saw in banks or on police shows, not in a daughter's living room. I sat down in my ergonomic office chair, the leather cold against my back. I woke up my main monitor. The screen glowed to life, bathing my face in harsh, white light. I navigated to the security folder. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. A part of me, the small, stupid part that still wanted to be the beloved daughter, hesitated. If I clicked this file, there was no going back. If I saw what I suspected I would see, the bridge wasn't just burned, it was nuked. I typed in my password. It was 24 characters long, a random string of nonsense. I opened the video logs. I set the timeline back 72 hours. The screen flickered, and then the timestamp read December 22nd, 1:10 in the afternoon, 2 days before I arrived in Cleveland, 2 days before they asked for my help. The camera angle covered the front entryway and the sweep of the living room. The apartment was still and empty. Then, the front door handle turned. I leaned closer to the screen, my breath catching in my throat. I had not given anyone a key. My cleaner came on Thursdays, and this was a Tuesday. The only other key existed in a lockbox at the bank. Or so I thought. The door swung open. My father, Gordon, stepped into the frame. He wasn't wearing a mask. He wasn't sneaking. He walked in with the casual arrogance of a landlord inspecting a property. He was wearing his heavy canvas coat and shaking snow off his boots directly onto my vintage Persian rug. He held a key in his hand, a shiny brass key. I paused the video. I zoomed in. It wasn't the spare I kept in the garage for emergencies. That key had a blue plastic cover. This one was bare metal. I realized with a jolt of nausea that he must have made a copy 3 years ago. The one time I let him stay here alone to water my plants when I went to a conference in London. He had kept it for 3 years. He had carried unauthorized access to my life in his pocket, waiting for a moment to use it. I pressed play. "It is clear," Gordon shouted back into the hallway. Derek walked in, then Kara, then my mother. They filed in like a SWAT team, but instead of guns, they carried an air of entitlement that was far more dangerous. "Wow," Derek said. The audio was crisp. I had installed high-gain microphones. "She really keeps it like a museum in here. Does she even live here?" "It is just for show," Marlene said, walking into the kitchen and running a finger along my granite countertops. "She likes people to think she is sophisticated." I watched, motionless, as my family dissected my life. Derek pulled a yellow tape measure from his belt. He didn't just look around. He began to work. He measured the distance from the entryway to the kitchen island. He measured the width of the hallway. "We can put the baby gate here," Derek said, pointing to the entrance of my home office. "And this wall?" He tapped the partition separating the living room from the dining area. "This is not load-bearing. I checked the building schematics online. We can knock this down, open it up, make a play area. Knock it down." He wasn't talking about temporary furniture arrangement. He was talking about demolition. You don't knock down walls in a place you are borrowing for a month. You knock down walls in a place you intend to keep forever. The camera switched to camera 2, the master bedroom. Kara walked in. She looked around at my king-sized bed, my silk drapes, my vanity table covered in expensive skincare products. She didn't look envious. She looked proprietary. She walked over to the closet. She opened it and pushed my clothes, my suits, my evening gowns, my cashmere sweaters, shoving them violently to one side to make empty space. "This is plenty of room," Kara said to the empty room. "I can put the crib right there by the window. The light is good." She sat down on the edge of my bed. She bounced a little, testing the mattress. "This is mine," she whispered. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a wish. It was a statement of fact. She lay back on my pillows, spreading her arms out, claiming the territory. "Finally," she sighed. "Finally, Something decent. I switched back to the main feed. My father was standing at the door of my office. He was looking at my setup. The 3 monitors, the server tower, the shredder, the wall of framed certifications. To me, that room represented 15 years of blood, sweat, and tears. It represented late nights, missed holidays, and the relentless grind to build a reputation in a cutthroat industry. Gordon didn't see that. "Look at all this junk," he muttered. "She doesn't need half this stuff. Computers, wires, it creates radiation. Bad for the baby." Marlene walked up behind him. "We can pack it up, put it in storage, or sell it. Derek knows a guy who buys electronics." "The room is a good size," Gordon noted. "Could be a guest room for us when we come to visit the grandkids." "But what about Nora?" Marlene asked. She didn't sound worried. She sounded curious, like she was asking about the weather. "Where will she work if she comes back?" Gordon turned to face her. He looked directly into the camera lens. Though he didn't see it, he looked right at me, across time and space. "Nora doesn't pay attention," he said. His voice was dismissive, heavy with a lifetime of underestimating me. "She is always in the clouds with her work. She will complain, sure, but she always adjusts. She is used to making space for us. She will just adapt. She always does. She always adjusts." The phrase hit me harder than a physical blow. It was the thesis statement of my life in their eyes. I was not a person with boundaries or needs. I was a self-correcting organism designed to absorb their chaos. I was water, fluid, formless, existing only to fill the gaps they left behind. They didn't fear me. They didn't respect me. They relied on my passivity like it was a natural resource. I paused the video again. My hand was shaking, not from sadness, but from a cold, vibrating rage. I minimized the video player and opened the browser. I had a hunch. If they had planned this physically, they had planned it administratively. I logged into the Homeowners Association portal for my building. I had administrator privileges because I served on the board. Another detail my family didn't know or care about. I went to the access logs. I filtered for login attempts on the resident portal. There it was. December 23rd, 10 in the morning. User, Marlene, Jenkins at mail. Com status, failed. Incorrect password. Status, failed. 2FA challenge. Triggered. They had tried to log in as me, but they didn't know my password. So they had tried forgot password. They tried to reset it, but my account was linked to my phone for 2-factor authentication, so the system had blocked them. I checked the IP address of the attempt. It traced back to a coffee shop 2 blocks from my condo. They had been here. They had physically been in my neighborhood, drinking coffee, trying to hack into my building's management system to add their names to the lease or register as tenants. They weren't waiting for me to say yes at dinner. They were trying to bypass me entirely. If they had succeeded, they would have had digital proof of residency before I even pulled into the driveway in Cleveland. This was not a family asking for a favor. This was a hostile corporate takeover. It was a coordinated, multi-pronged attack on my assets. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was the feeling of a heavy weight being lifted. For years, I had carried the guilt of not being enough for them. I felt guilty for my success. I felt guilty for my distance. I wondered if I was the bad guy, the cold career woman abandoning her struggling family. But looking at the screen, seeing the time-stamped evidence of their betrayal, the guilt evaporated. It simply vanished. You do not feel guilty when you catch a thief in your house. You do not feel guilty when you identify a parasite. I opened a new folder on my desktop. I named it Case File 324. I began to capture. Screenshot. Gordon with the unauthorized key. Save. Screenshot. Derek with the tape measure. Save. Screenshot. Kara on my bed. Save. Audio clip. Knock this wall down. Save. Audio clip. She always adjusts. Save. Log file. The failed hacking attempt from the coffee shop. Save. I printed every single image. The printer whirred in the silence, spitting out page after page of high-resolution betrayal. The paper was warm in my hands. I took the hard drive out of the server. I copied the entire 72-hour video file onto an encrypted USB drive. I put the drive on a chain and hung it around my neck, tucking it under my shirt against my skin. I sat back in the chair. The room was dark, lit only by the blue blink of the modem and the white glow of the monitor. I realized I wasn't crying. I touched my face. My cheeks were dry. My mother always said I was too emotional. She said I cried too easily when I was a child. She used to mock me for it, but I wasn't crying now. I looked at the face of my father frozen on the screen, his hand on my property, his face twisted in a sneer of contempt. "I am not adjusting this time, Dad," I whispered to the empty room. I closed the folder. I shut down the computer. I had the evidence. I had the motive. I had the perpetrators. Now, I needed to execute the liquidation. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the Chicago skyline, the glittering grid of a city that ran on contracts and consequences. Tomorrow, I would not be a sister. I would not be a daughter. I would be a landlord dealing with a breach of contract, and the eviction notice was going to be legendary. The sun rose on Christmas morning, casting a pale, indifferent light over the Chicago skyline. For most of the world, this was a day of unwrapping gifts and drinking cocoa. For me, it was the opening bell of the most important business transaction of my life. I did not make coffee. I did not turn on the news. I sat at my dining table, my laptop open, my phone charged to 100%. At exactly 8 in the morning, I dialed the first number. Rowan Pierce was my classmate in law school before I pivoted to compliance, and he went into high-stakes property litigation. He was the kind of lawyer who didn't bill by the hour. He billed by the victory. He answered on the second ring. "Merry Christmas, Nora," he said. His voice was raspy, likely from a late night, but alert. "Please tell me you are calling to wish me holiday cheer and not because someone has been indicted." "I need to liquidate an asset," I said. Immediately, there was a pause on the line. The festive pleasantries evaporated. Rowan shifted instantly into professional mode. "Define immediately," he said. 72 hours, I replied. "I need a cash buyer. I need a waiver of all inspection contingencies. And most importantly, I need a buyer who has a very aggressive, very capable legal team, someone who views tenant disputes as a sport." "Nora," Rowan said slowly, "you are talking about the West Loop condo, your place, the one you spent 2 years renovating." "It is a liability now," I said, my voice flat. "I want it off my books by the 28th. Can you draft the paperwork?" "For a closing that fast, you need a specific kind of buyer," Rowan warned. "You are going to take a hit on the price." "I do not care about the price," I said. "I care about the timeline, and I care about the possession clause. The new owner needs to take legal possession at 9 in the morning on December 28th. "I will start drafting," Rowan said. "I will send over the DocuSign forms by noon. But you need a broker who operates in the shadows. You need Talia." "I am calling her next," I said. I hung up and dialed Talia Voss. Talia was not a real estate agent who put her face on bus stop benches. She was a broker for the ultra-wealthy, for people who bought penthouses through shell companies and offshore trusts. She moved properties that were never listed on the public market. "Nora," Talia answered, "I was just about to put a turkey in the oven." "Keep the turkey," I said. "I have a pocket listing for you, my unit, $350,000, cash only, closing in 3 days. "That is below market value," Talia said immediately. "You could get 400 if you waited until spring." "I am not selling the square footage. Talia, I am selling the speed," I told her. "I have a family situation. I need this title transferred before the new year. Do you have a shark in your Rolodex?" "I have Gavin Cross," she said. The name was familiar. Gavin Cross was a developer who was infamous in Chicago. He didn't just buy apartments, he bought entire floors, gutted them, and turned them into ultra-luxury rentals. He was known for 2 things: paying with wire transfers that cleared in an hour, and having zero tolerance for delays. "Gavin has been eyeing your building for months," Talia continued. He wants to break through the floor and connect a unit downstairs to make a duplex. He would love to get his hands on your layout. He would gut it. Perfect, I said. The word tasted sweet. If he wants to gut it, that means he will start demolition immediately. He would probably have a crew there the morning he gets the keys. Talia agreed. He is impatient. Call him, I commanded. Tell him if he can close by the 27th and take possession on the 28th. It is his, as is, furniture included if he wants it, though I am taking the personal items. I will call you back in 10 minutes, Talia said. I put the phone down. My heart was beating with a steady, rhythmic thud. It wasn't fear. It was the adrenaline of execution. I was treating my own life like a distressed asset, stripping it down to the studs to save the foundation. 7 minutes later, Talia called back. He is in, she said. He is at Aspen, but his attorney is in the city. They are wiring the earnest money now. He accepts the condition of the property. He actually prefers you leave the appliances because he is going to donate them for a tax write-off before he demos the kitchen. Done, I said. Nora, Talia asked, her voice dropping a decibel. Is everything okay? You sound mechanical. I am just efficient. Talia, send the contract. Step 1 was complete. The house was no longer mine. In 48 hours, it would belong to Gavin Cross, a man who would look at my family not as guests, but as trespassers delaying his construction schedule. Now came the logistics. I needed to extract my life from the apartment without leaving a trace that would tip off my family. If they saw a moving truck, if they saw boxes, they would panic. They would rush over. They would try to intervene. I needed to be invisible. I opened a new tab on my browser. I went to the State Secretary of State website. I registered a new limited liability company. I named it Orion Logistics LLC. It sounded generic, corporate, and boring. I used a registered agent address so my name would not appear on the public filing. Using the tax identification number for the new LLC, I rented a climate-controlled storage unit on the other side of the city, near O'Hare Airport. I paid for 6 months in advance. Then I called a moving company that specialized in corporate relocations. I need a pack and move service, I told the dispatcher. Tonight, after dark, and I need it to be discreet, unmarked trucks. That is a double holiday rate, ma'am, the dispatcher said. I will pay triple if you can be here at 8 this evening and be gone by midnight, I countered. We will be there, he said. I spent the afternoon preparing the battlefield. I went through my files, my birth certificate, my passport, my social security card, the deeds to my car. Everything went into a fireproof briefcase. I took the hard drives from my server. I took the physical photo albums, the few sentimental items I actually cared about, a necklace from my grandmother, a signed first edition book I bought in Paris. I packed my clothes, but not all of them. I left the old coats. I left the sweaters I never wore. I left the shoes that were scuffed. I had to curate the illusion. When my family walked in on the 28th, the apartment had to look lived in. It had to look like I had just stepped out for a trip to Tokyo. It had to look vulnerable. If the place was empty, they would be suspicious. If the place was full, they would feel comfortable. They would feel safe. And a safe enemy is a careless enemy. By the time evening fell, I had separated my life into 2 piles. Essential Nora and Prop Nora. The movers arrived at 8 sharp. They were professionals. They moved in silence, wrapping my expensive monitors, my ergonomic chair, and my artwork in heavy blankets. They loaded the truck in the alleyway to avoid the cameras in the main lobby. By 11:30 at night, the apartment was transformed. My high-end Italian leather sofa was gone. In its place, I had dragged up an old, slightly sagging couch from the building's basement storage that a neighbor had abandoned. It looked fine from a distance, but the springs poked you if you sat too hard. My dining table, a slab of reclaimed walnut, was in the truck. I replaced it with a folding table covered by a long tablecloth. I went into the kitchen. I removed the water filter from the expensive coffee machine I was leaving behind, ensuring it would leak slowly if anyone tried to use it. I loosened the handle on the bathroom door just enough so it would jiggle annoying. I was stage dressing a set for a play called The Squatters. When the movers left, the silence in the apartment was different. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a vacuum. I sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by the prop furniture. I opened my laptop one last time. It was time for the financial severance. For years, I had justified the money I spent on my family as helping. I told myself I was being a good sister, a good daughter. But as I looked at the spreadsheet I had compiled, I realized it wasn't help. It was a subscription fee I was paying to be part of the family. I logged into my bank account. Item 1. Verizon Family Plan. Status: active. Monthly cost: $240. Users: Gordon, Marlene, Kara, Derek, Nora. Action: remove all lines except the primary account holder. Me. I clicked Remove. A warning box popped up. This will immediately deactivate service for the selected lines. Are you sure? I clicked Yes. I imagined Derek trying to load a sports video on his phone and seeing the no service icon. The thought brought a cold smile to my lips. Item 2. State Farm Auto Insurance. Status: active. Monthly cost: $180. Vehicle: 2021 Ford F-150, Gordon's truck. Action: cancel policy. Reason: non-payment. I had been paying this for 3 years because my father said the premiums were choking him. I clicked cancel. The system informed me a letter would be mailed to the policy address. Good. They would get it in 3 days. Just enough time to panic. Item 3. Netflix, Hulu, HBO Max, Spotify Family. Status: active. Action: change password. Sign out of all devices. This seemed petty, but it wasn't. It was psychological. I wanted their screens to go black. I wanted the silence to find them. I wanted every comfort they took for granted to simply evaporate. Item 4. The emergency credit card. This was the big one. I had added Derek as an authorized user on one of my travel rewards cards 2 years ago when he was stuck at an airport. He was supposed to destroy the card. He hadn't. I monitored the charges: gas, groceries, the occasional accidental purchase at a liquor store. I usually just paid it. Action: report lost, stolen, remove authorized user. I typed in the justification: unauthorized possession of card. I worked down the list for an hour. The gym membership Kara never used. The cloud storage for my mother's photos. The Amazon Prime household account. Click, cancel, click, delete, click, terminate. With every click, I felt lighter. I was cutting the ropes that held the parachute down. I was severing the IV lines that were draining my blood to keep them warm. But I did not send any notifications. I did not send a text saying, "I am cutting you off." That was the key. Silence. If I told them, they would argue. They would beg. They would bargain. By doing it silently, I was removing the negotiation table entirely. They would find out when the card was declined. They would find out when the phone stopped ringing. They would find out when the world they thought was stable suddenly tilted on its axis. I finished at 1 a.m. I stood up and walked through the condo one last time. It looked ready. There were towels in the bathroom, cheap ones I bought at a dollar store. There was milk in the fridge, expired yesterday. There was a note on the counter, written on my heavy cream-colored stationery: "Welcome. Make yourselves comfortable." It was the truth. I wanted them to get very comfortable. I wanted them to unpack their bags. I wanted them to hang their clothes in the closet. I wanted them to feel like they had won. Because the higher they climbed, the harder the fall would be when Gavin Cross knocked the ladder out from under them. I went to the bedroom and lay down on the mattress. I had stripped the high thread count sheets and replaced them with a polyester set that scratched my skin. I set the alarm on my phone. 5:30 in the morning. I wasn't waking up early to catch a flight to Tokyo. I wasn't going to the airport at all. Tomorrow, at 9 o'clock, I had a meeting with Gavin's lawyer to sign the deed. At 10 o'clock, I was handing over the keys. And at 11 o'clock, I was driving to Denver to start my new life. leaving my family to walk into the trap they had built for themselves. I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I didn't worry about whether my parents would be angry with me. I didn't worry about whether Kara would cry. I slept the sleep of the just, the sleep of a woman who has finally balanced the books. The transformation of my apartment from a high-end sanctuary into a theatrical set of horrors was complete by 4 a.m. I stood in the center of the living room, hands on my hips, surveying the work. To the untrained eye, specifically, the greedy eyes of my family, it looked like a fully furnished luxury condo ready for occupancy. To me, it looked like a minefield. I had spent the last 6 hours orchestrating a physical swap that would have impressed a Broadway stage manager. My Herman Miller Aeron chair, the one that cost me over $1,000 and saved my back during 80-hour work weeks, was safely in a storage unit in O'Hare. In its place sat a generic office chair I had found at a 24-hour liquidation center. It looked professional enough, black and sleek, but the pneumatic cylinder was broken. The moment anyone over 150 pounds sat on it, it would sink violently to the lowest setting with a jarring thud. I imagined my father sitting there, trying to look important, only to be dropped 6 inches in a humiliating instant. The dining table was another masterpiece of deception. My original table was solid walnut, heavy as a tank. The replacement was a particle board knockoff that I had found on an online marketplace for $20. One leg was 1/4 inch shorter than the others. I had carefully placed a small wedge of cardboard under it to keep it steady for now, but the cardboard was designed to slip. The first time someone leaned their elbows on the table to complain about their day, the whole surface would tilt, spilling drinks and shattering the illusion of stability. I walked into the kitchen. I had removed my Italian espresso machine, the one my mother loved to criticize for being pretentious while drinking the coffee it made. On the counter now sat a plastic drip coffee maker. It looked brand new. It was not. I had modified the water reservoir with a needle-thin puncture near the base. It would hold water for about 10 minutes, just enough time to brew a pot, before beginning a slow, maddening leak that would pool across the counter and drip onto the floor. It was a subtle torture, the kind that makes you question your own sanity. The artwork on the walls was the final touch. I had taken down my limited edition prints and replaced them with generic, mass-produced canvases I bought from a discount home goods store. They were bland landscapes and abstract swirls of beige and gray. They were the kind of art you see in a dentist's waiting room. They signaled a lack of personality. They signaled that this space was void of soul. It was perfect. It was a livable space that would turn hostile the moment you tried to actually live in it. But the physical discomfort was just the appetizer. The main course was waiting in the hallway closet. I walked to the closet near the front door. This was where I kept the linens and the vacuum cleaner. I knew my mother would open this door within 5 minutes of arriving. She would want to inspect my towel count. She would want to judge my cleaning supplies. On the top shelf, right at eye level, I placed 4 boxes. They were beautiful boxes. I had wrapped them in expensive gold foil paper, the kind that shimmers under the hall lights. I tied each one with a thick red velvet ribbon. They looked like the grandest Christmas presents I had ever given. In a way, I was giving them the gift of reality. I picked up a black marker and wrote their names on the attached tags in my best calligraphy. Gordon, Marlene, Kara, Derek. I adjusted the bow on the first box. Inside the box labeled Gordon. There was no sweater, no watch, no bottle of scotch. There was a single, crisp envelope containing a letter from the bank. It was the notification that the automatic transfer for his truck payment had been canceled. I had included a printout of the amortization schedule, highlighting exactly how much principal was left, $22,000. I also included a printout of the text message he sent me 3 years ago saying, "I will pay you back next month, I promise." Below it, I wrote a single line. The promise has expired. Next was Marlene's box. My mother loved to shop. She loved the feeling of swiping a card and worrying about the bill later, or rather, letting me worry about the bill later. Inside her box was a stack of paper. It was the cancellation confirmation for the supplemental credit card I had given her for emergencies. I had also included the last 12 billing statements, with red ink circling every purchase that was clearly not an emergency. Designer handbags, spa treatments, dinners at steakhouses. At the bottom of the stack was a printout of a job application for a receptionist role at a local clinic, blank and ready to be filled out. Then there was Kara's box. This one was lighter than the others. Inside was a letter regarding the education fund I had been contributing to for her first child. I had not canceled the fund. I wasn't a monster who would punish a child. But I had transferred the trusteeship to a third-party legal firm. Kara could no longer withdraw from it for miscellaneous expenses. She could only access it with a tuition bill. I also included a brochure for budget-friendly apartments in Cleveland, with the deposit requirements highlighted. Finally, I reached for Derek's box. This one felt heavy in my hands. It carried the weight of a felony. I had found the discrepancy 3 days ago, during my initial audit, but I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't confronted him. I simply gathered the data. Derek had used my personal information, my social security number, my previous address, to open a line of credit at a hardware store chain 6 months ago. He had maxed it out buying tools and materials for his side jobs that never seemed to make money. The balance was $4,000. He had been making the minimum payments from a joint account he shared with Kara. Hiding the statements, inside the gold box, nestled in white tissue paper like a precious jewel, was a police report. Case number 89204. Title: Identity Theft and Fraudulent Credit Activity. Next to the police report was a letter from the fraud department of the credit bureau, confirming that the account had been flagged and the debt was being investigated as criminal activity. I didn't just close the account, I reported it as a crime. I had essentially handed him a potential prison sentence wrapped in a bow. I placed the 4 boxes side by side on the shelf. They gleamed under the closet light, promising luxury, delivering ruin. I closed the closet door. The latch clicked softly. I went to the kitchen island. I took a piece of my heavy, cream-colored letterhead, the expensive stationery I used for thank you notes. I took my fountain pen. I uncapped it. The ink black and permanent. I wrote 5 words. Welcome. Make yourselves comfortable. I did not sign it, Love Nora. I did not sign it, Nora. I left it unsigned. The handwriting was signature enough. I left the note on the kitchen island, right next to the bowl where they would inevitably drop their keys. It was the first thing they would see. It was welcoming. It was polite. It was the perfect cover for the trapdoor they were standing on. I looked at my watch. It was 5:15 in the morning. The sun was not yet up, but the city was beginning to stir. I could hear the distant rumble of the L train and the vague hum of traffic on the Kennedy Expressway. I picked up my bag. It contained only the essentials: my laptop, my hard drives, and a change of clothes. My real life, my true assets, was already gone, safely stored away in a metal locker miles from here. I walked to the front door. I put my hand on the knob. For a moment, I paused. I looked back at the apartment. It looked exactly like the home they envied. It had the view. It had the space. It had the address. But it was a shell. It was a hollowed-out carcass of a home, waiting for the vultures to land so the ground could give way beneath them. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. I waited for the guilt to rise. I waited for the childhood programming to kick in, the voice that said, "But they are your family. You should help them." But the voice was silent. Instead, I felt the cool, professional satisfaction of a project manager signing off on a completed phase. I wasn't taking revenge. Revenge implies passion. Revenge implies that I was hurt and acting out of anger. This wasn't anger. This was a correction. This was a market adjustment. I had spent 37 years in a one-sided contract. I had provided capital, labor, and emotional support. They had provided liability, risk, and depreciation. Today, I was exercising the termination clause. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The air in the corridor was cool and smelled of industrial cleaner. I turned back to the threshold. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the key. the heavy brass key to the front door. I bent down. I lifted the corner of the welcome mat. It was a rough, choir mat that shed bristles every time you stepped on it. I slid the key underneath. I promised, I whispered to the empty air. I said I would leave the key under the mat. I stood up. I smoothed my coat. I didn't look back. I walked down the long hallway toward the elevator. My boots made a sharp, rhythmic sound on the floor. Click, click, click. It sounded like a clock ticking down. I pressed the call button. The elevator arrived instantly, the doors sliding open with a soft chime. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the garage. As the doors closed, cutting off my view of the 4th floor, I didn't feel like a woman who had just homelessed her pregnant sister or sued her parents. I felt like a CEO who had just successfully spun off a toxic asset. I got into my car, synced my phone to the Bluetooth, and set the GPS for Denver. The estimated drive time was 14 hours. 14 hours of silence. 14 hours of peace. I backed out of the parking spot. As I drove up the ramp and merged onto the street, the first gray light of dawn was hitting the pavement. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was a text from my mother. "We are leaving Cleveland now. Kara is so excited. See you tonight." I didn't reply. I didn't delete it. I just let the screen go dark. I turned onto the highway, accelerating smoothly. By the time they arrived and found the key under the mat, I would be crossing the Mississippi River. By the time they opened the gold boxes, I would be in Nebraska. And by the time Gavin Cross's legal team arrived on the 28th, I would be untouchable. The contract was void. The audit was closed. And for the first time in my life, I was finally, truly in the black. The date was December 27th. The time was 7:15 in the evening. I was sitting in the United Polaris Lounge at O'Hare International Airport. The atmosphere was a hermetically sealed bubble of luxury, soft jazz, the clinking of crystal glasses, and the hushed conversations of business travelers heading to London or Tokyo. I had a ticket to Narita in my pocket, a refundable fare I had purchased solely to gain access to this specific theater of operations. I had no intention of boarding the plane. My destination was not Japan. It was the end of a lifetime of manipulation. I sat in a high-backed leather chair in a secluded corner, a glass of Pinot Noir untouched near my right hand. My laptop was open. On the screen, a grid of 4 video feeds flickered in high definition. I was watching my own apartment. At 7:18, a notification popped up on the bottom right of my screen. Motion detected. Front entry. I leaned forward. I did not feel my heart race. I did not feel the familiar clutch of anxiety that used to plague me whenever my family was near. I felt only the cold, clinical detachment of a scientist observing bacteria in a petri dish. On the screen, the front door swung open. Derek entered first. He didn't walk in. He marched in. He was carrying 2 massive suitcases, the wheels leaving wet, slushy tracks across the hardwood floor. He didn't wipe his feet. He kicked the door wider with his heel to make room for the others. "We are in!" he shouted, his voice tinny through the microphone I had hidden near the thermostat. "I told you the key would be there. She is predictable as clockwork." My mother, Marlene, followed him. She was carrying 3 large plastic laundry baskets filled with clothes, loose shoes, and what looked like kitchen appliances. They hadn't packed for a vacation. They had packed for a relocation. Then came Kara. She waddled in, wrapped in a pink puffer coat, holding her phone up in front of her face. She wasn't looking at the apartment with her own eyes. She was looking at it through her screen. She was already recording. "Hey guys," I heard her say, her voice pitching up into that fake, cheerful influencer tone she used for her 300 followers. "So, big news. We finally made the move. Look at this view. West Loop living, baby, new beginnings for me and the little one." She panned the phone around the living room, capturing the floor-to-ceiling windows and the city lights beyond. She didn't mention me. She didn't say, "My sister is letting us stay," she said. We made the move. It was a claim of ownership, broadcast to the world in real time. Gordon brought up the rear. He struggled with a heavy box that looked like it contained tools. He dropped it on the floor with a heavy thud that vibrated through my laptop speakers. Drafty, he complained immediately, rubbing his hands together. She keeps the heat too low. Typical Nora. Saves pennies, freezes people. I took a sip of my wine. The thermostat was actually set to 72 degrees, a perfectly comfortable temperature, but complaining was Gordon's way of marking territory. If he could find a flaw, he could assert dominance over the space. I watched as they spread out. It was like watching a swarm of locusts settle on a field. Marlene walked over to the sofa, the sagging, second-hand disaster I had swapped in the night before. She sat down heavily, and as I predicted, the cushion gave way, sinking her down until her knees were higher than her hips. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she groaned, struggling to get back up. "This furniture, it looks nice, but it is garbage, cheap, just like her. She makes all that money and buys this? It is all surface with her, no substance." "It is modern, Marlene," Derek said, dropping the suitcases in the middle of the room. "It is supposed to be uncomfortable. It is art," he laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "Don't worry. We will get our own stuff in here by next week. Get that recliner from the storage unit." Next week, I typed a note in my digital log. Tenant admits intent to move furniture in. Timestamp, 7:24 p.m. Derek pulled a tape measure from his belt. This was the moment I had anticipated. He walked straight to the main wall in the living room, the one I had just repainted a pristine dove gray. "This is where the 70-inch goes," he declared, extending the yellow metal tape. "Right here. I am going to have to drill into the studs. The mount needs heavy anchors. I brought the impact driver. Do not make a mess tonight," Marlene warned, unpacking a box of pots and pans onto my kitchen island. "Wait until tomorrow." "I am just marking the holes," Derek said. He took a thick carpenter's pencil from his pocket and drew a large, dark X directly onto the paint, then another, then a long horizontal line. I watched him deface my wall. I felt nothing. That wall didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to the bank account of Gavin Cross. Derek was vandalism a construction site. He just didn't know it yet. While Derek planned his home theater, Gordon was on a mission. I switched the camera view to the office den feed. My father walked into the room where my desk used to be. He looked around at the generic table and the wobbly chair. He wasn't interested in the furniture. He went straight to the filing cabinet, a cheap metal one I had bought at the liquidation sale. He yanked the top drawer open, empty. He yanked the second drawer open, empty. "Damn it," he muttered. "What are you looking for?" "Gordon?" Marlene called from the kitchen. "Paperwork," he shouted back. "Utility bills, the deed, insurance. If we are going to switch the accounts over, I need the account numbers." She usually keeps everything filed alphabetically. She is obsessive about it. He slammed the drawer shut. He looked around the room, frustration etching deep lines into his face. He checked the closet shelf. Nothing. He walked back into the living room, his face red. "She cleared it out. There is nothing here. No papers. Just some manuals for the fridge." "Maybe she took them to the safety deposit box," Kara said from the kitchen, where she was already eating the crackers I had left in the pantry. "You know how paranoid she is." "It doesn't matter," Gordon said, waving his hand dismissively. "We are in. That is what counts. Once we get a few pieces of mail delivered here, the law is on our side. I looked it up. 30 days is the gold standard. But even a week establishes intent." "Are you sure she won't flip out?" Kara asked, her mouth full. "When she gets back?" Gordon chuckled. It was a sound that curdled in my stomach. "Nora? Flip out? Please. She will write a strongly worded email. Then she will cry. Then she will ask us if we need anything else. She is weak. Kara. She needs us to like her. She won't dare throw her pregnant sister out in the snow. She cares too much about what people think. She is weak." I typed another note. Subject assumes homeowner is compliant due to emotional manipulation. Miscalculation confirmed. At that moment, my cell phone, which was sitting face down on the lounge table, began to vibrate. It buzzed against the wood like an angry hornet. I picked it up. "Marlene." We arrived safe. The place is distinct, a bit cold, but we will warm it up. Thanks for helping family. It means a lot. Heart emoji. Praying hands. Emoji. Kara. OMG. Nora. Thank you. The baby is going to love the view. I feel so much better already. You are the best auntie ever. Sparkle emoji. Baby emoji. Derek. Got in. Thanks. I looked from the phone to the screen. On the phone. Gratitude. Love. Appreciation. On the screen. Disdain. Entitlement. Vandalism. It was a masterclass in duality. They were keeping the ATM happy while they dismantled the machine. They thought they had successfully played the game. They sent the requisite thank you texts, believing that was the currency required to purchase a $350,000 home. I did not reply. I set the phone to Do Not Disturb. I watched for another hour. I watched them use my shower. I watched Marlene criticize the water pressure. I watched Kara throw her coat on the floor of my bedroom and kick it into the corner. I watched them eat a pizza they ordered, wiping their greasy hands on the throw pillows I had bought at the dollar store. Around 11 o'clock, they began to settle down. They turned off the lights. The feed switched to night vision, ghostly green and black. I saw them sleeping in the beds. They slept soundly. They slept with the heavy, dreamless sleep of people who believe they have gotten away with something. I closed my laptop. I finished my wine. I walked out of the lounge, past the gate agents calling for the final boarding to Tokyo. I walked out of the terminal and into the cold Chicago night. I hailed a cab to a hotel near the airport, one with thick curtains and soundproof walls. I slept for 6 hours. The next morning, December 28th, I was awake before the alarm. I set up my command center at the hotel desk. Coffee, black, laptop, open, phone, silent. The time was 9:58 in the morning. On the screen, the condo was a scene of domestic chaos. Breakfast debris littered the kitchen counter. The leaking coffee maker had done its job. A dark puddle of water was slowly spreading across the granite and dripping onto the floor. Marlene was wiping it with a towel, complaining loudly about cheap junk. Kara was on the sofa, watching TV. Derek was pacing, holding his phone, probably trying to figure out why his credit card had been declined at the hardware store earlier that morning. I do not understand, I heard Derek say. It says contact issuer. I paid the bill. Maybe Nora canceled it? Kara asked, looking up. She wouldn't, Derek scoffed. She would have told me. Probably just a glitch. I checked the time on my laptop. 9:59. I took a sip of coffee. It was hot and bitter. I wasn't waiting for a text. I wasn't waiting for a phone call. I was waiting for a breach. In the hallway outside my condo, beyond the view of my interior cameras, an elevator was chiming. I knew who was on it. Gavin Cross did not play games. I had met his team yesterday to sign the papers. His lawyer was a man who looked like he smiled once a decade. His project manager was a man named Sledge, or at least that is what people called him, who carried a crowbar like a scepter. The deed was recorded. The wire transfer was in my account. Technically, legally, and physically, that apartment now belonged to Orion Development Corp., and Gavin Cross had a strict schedule. Demolition was set to start at 10 o'clock sharp. On the screen, Gordon was standing by the window, looking out at the snow. "It is a good day," he said, stretching his arms. "I think I will go down to the gym later. Check out the facilities." "Dad," Kara said, "someone is at the door." I leaned in. I didn't hear a knock. Gavin's team didn't knock to ask for permission. They knocked to announce presence. Bang, bang, bang. It was a heavy, authoritarian sound. "I will get it," Derek said, puffing out his chest. "Probably the doorman bringing up a package. I ordered some drill bits." He walked to the door. He unlocked it. He swung it open with the confidence of a man who owns the castle. "Yeah?" Derek said. The camera angle allowed me to see the slice of the hallway. It wasn't a doorman. It was a wall of black suits and yellow safety vests. I saw a man in a hard hat step forward. He held a clipboard in one hand and a set of master keys in the other. Behind him, two large men in security uniforms stood with their arms crossed. "Who are you?" Derek asked, his voice dropping an octave. "Construction," the man in the hard hat said. His voice was loud, flat, and bored. "We are here for the demo. Unit 4B. Schedule says gut renovation starts at 1000 hours. You have the wrong apartment." Derek laughed nervously. "We live here. My sister owns this place." "Correction," a second voice said. A man in a sharp gray suit stepped into the frame. He was holding a leather folder. "Ms. Jenkins owned this place. As of yesterday, this property is owned by Mr. Cross, and according to the contract, the unit is to be delivered vacant." Derek froze. He looked back at Gordon. Gordon turned from the window, his face going pale. "What is going on?" Marlene shouted from the kitchen. "Excuse me," the suit said, pushing past Derek into the entryway. He didn't ask to come in. He entered. "I am the attorney for the new owner. You are trespassing on an active construction site. You have 5 minutes to clear the premises before we involve law enforcement." I watched Derek's face. I watched the arrogance drain out of him like water from a cracked vessel, replaced instantly by confusion and dawn-breaking terror. I took another sip of coffee. "Merry Christmas," I whispered to the screen. The show had begun. The confrontation in the doorway did not de-escalate. It calcified. From my vantage point on the screen, the scene played out with the stark, high-contrast clarity of a police procedural. The hallway light spilled onto the faces of my family, illuminating the exact moment their reality fractured. Derek stood with one hand on the doorframe, his knuckles white. The lawyer, a man whose suit cost more than Derek's car, did not blink. Behind him, the building manager, Mr. Henderson, a man I had known for years as a stickler for rules, adjusted his glasses and consulted a digital tablet. "I do not care who bought what," Derek spat, trying to summon the bravado he used on job sites. "We are tenants. You cannot just barge in here. There are laws. Eviction takes months." The lawyer stepped into the apartment. He moved with the fluid, unstoppable momentum of a shark entering a school of fish. He didn't ask permission. He simply occupied the space. He placed a leather portfolio on the nearest surface, the wobbly dining table I had staged. The table shuddered under the weight, the short legs slipping on the floor, causing the lawyer to frown for a microsecond before he steadied it with a gloved hand. "Tenants," the lawyer repeated. The word sounded like an insult in his mouth. "Interesting choice of words. Mr. Henderson, does the building registry show any lease agreement on file for Unit 4B? Mr. Henderson tapped his screen. "Negative. No lease, no sublet approval form, no guest registration exceeding 48 hours. "There you have it," the lawyer said, opening the portfolio. He extracted a document with a blue cover sheet. "This is the deed transfer, recorded at the Cook County Recorder of Deeds office at 4:15 yesterday afternoon. The property is now owned by Orion Development. And this," he pulled out a second document, "is the construction permit approved by the Homeowners Association for immediate demolition and remediation." Kara waddled forward from the living room, clutching a throw pillow to her chest. Her face was a mask of panic. "No, that is impossible. My sister said we could stay here. She gave us permission. You can call her." "Ms. Jenkins' permission is irrelevant," the lawyer said, his voice devoid of empathy. "She no longer owns the property. She cannot grant permission for you to reside in a building she has no legal claim to. It would be like me giving you permission to sleep in the White House." Gordon marched into the fray. He pulled himself up to his full height, puffing out his chest in a display of patriarchal authority that usually worked on waitresses and customer service reps. "Now listen here," Gordon boomed, pointing a finger at the security guard. "We are family. We are blood. That girl would never sell this place without telling us. This is some kind of mistake, or a scam. I am not moving a muscle until I speak to Nora." "You are welcome to try and contact her," the lawyer said, checking his watch. "However, that does not change the timeline. You are currently trespassing on private property. The new owner has a strict schedule. We have rights, Gordon shouted. Squatters' rights, residency rights. The security guard, a man with a neck as thick as a tree trunk, stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Sir, residency requires proof. Do you have a utility bill in your name at this address? A driver's license? A piece of mail? Gordon opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at the empty countertop where the mail should have been. He looked at the empty drawers he had ransacked the night before. We just got here, Gordon stammered. The mail is coming. We were going to switch it over today. So, no proof? The guard stated flatly. That means you are intruders. Intruders? Derek laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. We have a key. Nora gave us a key. Mr. Henderson, the building manager, cleared his throat. He looked up from his tablet, his expression severe. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The twist of the knife. Actually, Mr. Henderson said, his voice cutting through the noise. Regarding the key, we have an incident report filed from December 22nd. Gordon froze. His eyes darted to the camera in the corner of the ceiling, the dummy camera that the building had installed, not my hidden one. What report? Derek asked, looking at Gordon. Security footage from the 22nd shows an unauthorized entry, Mr. Henderson read from the report. An individual matching the description of this gentleman, he gestured to Gordon, used a key that was not issued by the management office. The key code on the lock log indicates it was a copy made from a maintenance access key, not a resident key. We have strict policies against unauthorized duplication. The room went silent. The air seemed to be sucked out of the space. Kara turned to her father. Dad? You said Nora gave you that key. Gordon's face turned a mottled shade of crimson. He began to stammer. She left it for me a while ago. It is the same thing. She meant for me to have it. Unauthorized possession of a key to a secure building is a security breach, the guard said. Technically, we could press charges for breaking and entering for the incident on the 22nd alone. This is ridiculous, Derek yelled. Stepping toward the lawyer, he raised his hand, perhaps to grab the papers, perhaps just to gesture. You cannot just throw a pregnant woman on the street. The reaction was instantaneous. 2 uniformed police officers, who had been standing just out of the frame in the hallway, stepped into the doorway. They hadn't been called then. They had been called before. Gavin's team was thorough. They anticipated resistance. Step back, sir, the first officer said. His hand rested casually, but deliberately, near his belt. Keep your hands visible. Derek stopped mid-stride. He looked at the uniform, then at the gun, then back at his wife. The tough guy facade crumbled instantly. He wasn't a fighter. He was a bully, and bullies crumble when faced with actual authority. We are just talking, Derek mumbled, holding his hands up. We are leaving. We need time. The lawyer looked at his watch again. The demolition crew is scheduled to begin swinging hammers at 10:15. It is now 10:05. I will grant you a courtesy window. He held up one finger. 10 minutes, the lawyer said. Grab what you can carry. Anything left behind will be considered abandoned property and will be disposed of by the remediation team. 10 minutes? Kara shrieked. We have suitcases. We have the baby's things. We have food. Then I suggest you move quickly, the lawyer said. He turned his back on them and began speaking to the construction foreman, completely dismissing their existence. On my screen, panic ensued. It was a frenzy of motion. Kara began to cry, a loud, wailing sound. But she was moving. She grabbed her purse. She grabbed the bag of snacks. Marlene was running in circles. My coat! Where is my coat? Gordon, get the boxes. Don't leave the mixer. Gordon was paralyzed. He stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the lawyer. He couldn't process the loss of control. In his world, he was the king. He was the one who made the rules. To be dismissed, To be treated like a criminal in a home he had already claimed as his own broke his brain. "Gordon, move!" Marlene screamed at him, shoving a laundry basket into his arms. Derek was trying to drag the 2 heavy suitcases toward the door, but the wheels got caught on the lip of the rug, the cheap rug I had laid down. He tripped, cursing loudly. "This is illegal!" Derek shouted as he stumbled. "I am going to sue. I am going to sue all of you." "You do that," the officer said, bored. 9 minutes. I watched them scramble. I watched them shove clothes into garbage bags. I watched Kara drop a bottle of juice, the glass shattering on the floor. No one stopped to clean it up. They just stepped over the sticky puddle, tracking orange footprints across the floor. It was dignified chaos. It was the frantic, desperate scuttle of cockroaches when the light is turned on. 5 minutes, the guard announced. "We can't fit it all," Kara sobbed. "The crib. We haven't even assembled the crib yet. It is still in the box." "Leave it," Derek snapped. "Just get the jewelry box. Get the valuables." Valuables. The irony was rich. There were no valuables in that apartment. I had removed everything worth more than $10. The jewelry box Kara was clutching contained costume jewelry I bought at a thrift store for decoration. Let her take it. Let her think she saved something. 3 minutes. The construction crew began to move in. Men in hard hats and dust masks walked past my family as if they were invisible obstacles. One worker carried a sledgehammer. Another carried a large roll of thick plastic sheeting. They started covering the windows. They started taping off the vents. One worker walked up to the wall where Derek had drawn his X marks just the night before. The worker didn't hesitate. He swung his hammer. Crack! The drywall exploded. A cloud of white dust puffed into the air. Kara screamed. "They are destroying it! They are destroying the house!" "It is their house, ma'am," the officer said, ushering her toward the door. "Time is up. Everyone out. Now." Gordon was the last one to leave. He stood in the doorway, clutching a toaster oven he had brought from home. He looked back at the apartment. He looked at the hole in the wall. He looked at the leaking coffee maker. He looked directly at the camera. For a second, I thought he saw me. I thought he could feel my gaze across the miles, burning through the lens. His eyes were wide, confused, and filled with a dawning horror. He realized, finally, that this wasn't bad luck. This wasn't a misunderstanding. He realized he had been played. "Gordon," Marlene yelled from the hallway. "The police are threatening to cuff Derek. Come on." Gordon turned and walked out. The door didn't close behind him. It couldn't. The construction crew had already removed the hinges. I watched the empty hallway for a moment. I saw the backs of their heads as they were escorted to the elevator. I saw the slump of their shoulders. I saw the pile of garbage bags they were dragging, looking for all the world like refugees from a disaster of their own making. "Clear," the foreman shouted. "Tear it down," the lawyer replied. I watched for 5 more minutes. I watched them rip up the floorboards. I watched them tear down the kitchen cabinets. I watched them dismantle the stage I had built. I reached out and closed the laptop. The screen went black. The silence in my hotel room was absolute. I took a deep breath. My hands were steady. My pulse was 60 beats per minute. I picked up my phone. It was blinking with notifications. 7 missed calls from Gordon, 4 from Marlene, 12 texts from Kara. I didn't unlock the phone. I simply powered it down. I stood up and walked to the window of the hotel. Outside, the world was moving on. Cars were driving. People were walking. Life was continuing. My family was currently standing on a sidewalk in the freezing Chicago winter, surrounded by plastic bags, with nowhere to go and no one to blame but themselves. They had the police report number for the key. They had the eviction notice. And they had the memory of the sledgehammer going through the wall. It was brutal. It was efficient. It was necessary. I packed my laptop into my bag. I checked out of the hotel. I walked to my car in the parking garage. I started the engine and pulled out onto the highway, heading west. The rearview mirror reflected nothing but the road behind me. I didn't look back at the city. There was nothing there for me anymore. Just a pile of rubble and a family learning the hard way that no is a complete sentence. Even if you have to burn a house down to say it. The first phase was over. The physical severance was complete. Now began the psychological fallout. And I was ready for that, too. Because while they were mourning a condo, I was celebrating a funeral. The funeral of the girl who couldn't say no. I merged onto the interstate, the road to Denver stretching out before me like a promise. I did not witness the final act of the tragedy in real time. I was on the interstate, watching the mile markers blur past as I put distance between myself and the wreckage of my former life. However, I know exactly what happened. I know because everything in a high-stakes eviction is documented. I had the incident reports from the private security firm. I had the body camera footage from the responding police officers, which was later entered into evidence, and I had the gleeful, blow-by-blow recounting from Rowan, my lawyer, who stood in that hallway and watched my family implode. It happened in the corridor, right outside the door of what used to be my apartment. The police were shepherding them toward the elevator like unruly cattle. My family was hysterical. They were surrounded by garbage bags, loose shoes, and the detritus of their failed invasion. The humiliation was total. The neighbors were peeking out from behind their doors, phones raised, recording the spectacle. But Derek was not done. He was a man drowning. And like all drowning men, he was thrashing blindly for a lifeline. His eyes landed on the laundry basket my mother was clutching. Sitting on top of a pile of dirty towels were the 4 gold boxes. The boxes I had wrapped with such care. The boxes that shimmered under the halogen lights of the hallway. "Wait!" Derek screamed. His voice cracked, echoing off the concrete walls. He lunged toward my mother, startling the police officer who was guiding him. "The gifts! Look at the gifts!" He grabbed the basket, nearly knocking Marlene over. He held up the box with his name on it like it was a holy relic. "You say she wants us out?" Derek yelled at the lawyer, shaking the box so hard the ribbon fluttered. "You say we are trespassing? Then explain this. She left us Christmas presents. Personalized presents. Who leaves gifts for intruders? This proves she wanted us here. It proves we are welcome." The lawyer, Rowan, paused. He raised an eyebrow. He knew exactly what was in those boxes because I had CC'd him on every single document inside them. But he let Derek have his moment. He let Derek dig the hole deeper. "If you believe that box contains evidence of residency," Rowan said calmly, "then by all means, open it." "I will," Derek shouted. "And then I am going to sue you for harassment. I am going to own this building by the time I am done." Derek tore at the paper. He ripped the expensive gold foil, shredding it with his fingernails. He was expecting keys. He was expecting a check. He was expecting a handwritten apology from me and a prepaid credit card. He tore the lid off the box. He froze. There was no key. There was no money. Inside lay a single, thick stack of documents stapled together with a red cover sheet. Derek stared at it. His brain couldn't process the shift. He pulled the papers out. The top page was not a greeting card. It was a formal notification from the fraud department of a major credit bureau. Below that was a police case file summary. Case number 89204. Subject: identity theft. Fraudulent application for credit. Complainant: Nora Jenkins. Suspect: Derek Miller. Derek's hands began to shake. The paper rattled audibly in the sudden silence of the hallway. "What is this?" he whispered. One of the police officers, a veteran sergeant with gray hair, stepped closer. He looked over Derek's shoulder. He read the header on the document. "That looks like a fraud investigation, son," the officer said. His tone shifted from annoyance to professional interest. "Is that your name listed as the suspect?" "No," Derek stammered, backing away. "I mean, yes, but it is a misunderstanding. Nora gave me permission to use her info. For the hardware store. For the business." "Did she?" the officer asked. He pointed to a highlighted paragraph on the second page. Because this document here says the victim filed an affidavit stating she had no knowledge of the account and that the signature on the application was forged. It says the file is pending signature verification from the state crime lab. Derek went pale. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like he might faint. Signature verification? Derek squeaked. Felony fraud is serious business, the officer said, resting his hand on his belt. If you signed her name, and she says you didn't, well, that is not a tenant dispute anymore. That is a criminal matter. She wouldn't, Derek mumbled. He looked at the box as if it had bitten him. Nora is soft. She never checks. She never reports anything. Looks like she checked this time, the officer said dryly. Panic is contagious. Seeing Derek crumble, the others scrambled to find their own salvation. My box, Marlene gasped. She set the laundry basket down and tore open the box labeled Marlene. She must have left me money. She knows I have bills. She ripped the lid off. She reached in and pulled out her stack. It was a credit card statement, the American Express black card she loved to flash at lunches. But this wasn't just a statement. It was a demand for payment in full. I had triggered the closure upon default clause by reporting the card as compromised by a family member, which legally allowed the bank to demand the entire balance immediately. $32,000? Marlene shrieked. Her eyes bulged. Minimum payment due immediately? Why? Why is it due now? She flipped the page. She saw the salary of the receptionist job I had printed out for her. $35,000 a year. This is impossible, Marlene cried, clutching the papers to her chest. That is more than I make in a year. She cut me off. She actually cut me off. How am I supposed to pay for the car? For the club? Gordon, she yelled, turning to my father. Open yours. She has to have left something for you. You are her father. Gordon was already fumbling with his box. His large, clumsy fingers struggled with the ribbon. He finally tore the box open. He didn't scream. He just made a low, choking sound. He was holding a spreadsheet. It was a detailed, 5-year history of every truck payment, every insurance premium, and every short-term loan I had covered for him. At the bottom, in bold red letters, were the words, Autopay authorization, terminated. She stopped the truck payments, Gordon whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. She stopped the insurance, the truck. The bank will take the truck. He looked up, his eyes wild. I need that truck for work. She knows I need it. This is malicious. This is elder abuse. It is financial independence, sir, Rowan interjected smoothly. She is simply declining to renew her subscription to your lifestyle. And mine? Kara asked. Her voice was small, terrified. She held her box like it was a bomb. She opened it slowly. She pulled out the letter from the trust attorney. Direct payment? Kara read aloud, her voice rising in pitch. What does that mean? Funds to be dispersed directly to educational institution or medical provider only. No cash withdrawals permitted. She flipped the page. She saw the rejection letter for her request to withdraw $5,000 for a baby moon vacation. She locked the fund, Kara screamed. I can't get the money. How am I supposed to live? I counted on that money for the nursery, for the stroller. Get a job, a construction worker muttered as he walked past them with a roll of duct tape. The hallway erupted. They were all shouting at once. Derek was trying to explain to the police officer that he meant to pay it back. Marlene was waving the bill at Rowan, demanding to speak to a manager. Kara was sobbing, crying that her baby was going to starve. Gordon was cursing, calling me names that would have made a sailor blush. Ungrateful, Gordon roared. After everything we did for her. She is trying to ruin us, Derek yelled. My credit score, Marlene wailed. It was a cacophony of entitlement dying a painful death. And then, the sound of the sledgehammers began again. Wham! 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 Inside the apartment, the demolition crew had moved to the kitchen. The sound of breaking ceramic tile and splintering wood thundered through the open doorway. It was deafening. It was the sound of consequences arriving with the force of a freight train. The noise drowned out their voices. Gordon tried to shout over it, but he was just a man yelling at a hurricane. The construction crew didn't care about their drama. They were on the clock. "All right, that is enough," the police sergeant shouted, his patience finally exhausted. "The show is over. You are blocking a fire exit and disturbing the peace. You need to vacate the building, now." "But my truck," Gordon yelled. "But my fraud case," Derek whimpered. "Move," the officer commanded. He put a hand on Derek's shoulder and spun him toward the elevator. They were herded down the hall. It was a pathetic procession. They weren't holding the things that mattered. They had left the toaster oven on the floor. They had dropped the laundry basket of clothes. Marlene was clutching the credit card bill. Gordon was gripping the list of canceled payments. Kara was holding the trust fund restrictions. Derek was holding his own arrest warrant. They held on to those papers as if they were precious. In a way, they were. Those papers were the only thing I had left them. The truth. The elevator doors opened. They were shoved inside. As the doors slid shut, cutting off the sight of their terrified, angry faces, the last thing audible was the sound of a power saw screaming to life inside Unit 4B, severing the past from the future. I was 300 miles away when it happened, but I felt the vibration in my bones. The cord was cut, the parasites had been detached, and for the first time in their lives, they were holding the bill. Denver sits exactly 1 mile above sea level. The air here is thinner, sharper, and drier than the humid, heavy atmosphere of the Midwest. It takes some people weeks to acclimate to the altitude, to stop gasping for breath when they climb a flight of stairs. But I adjusted immediately. For the first time in 37 years, I felt like I was actually breathing. It had been 6 months since I watched my family being escorted out of a hallway in Chicago on a live video feed. 6 months since I drove west with my life in the trunk of a sedan. I was now the Senior Director of Risk Assessment at Crown Hollow Compliance Systems. My office was on the 24th floor of a glass tower that reflected the jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains. My desk was made of legitimate mahogany, not particle board. My chair did not sink when I sat in it. I had not disappeared. I was not in witness protection. I was simply unavailable. There is a distinct difference between vanishing and resigning. When you vanish, you are hiding from something. When you resign, you are simply stating that the terms of employment are no longer acceptable. I had resigned from the position of family savior. I had retired from the role of the designated ATM. My phone used to be a source of constant, low-level panic. In the old days, a vibration meant a crisis. It meant Derek needed bail money. It meant my mother needed to vent about her neighbors. It meant Kara needed validation for a bad decision. On the day of the eviction, my phone had logged 78 missed calls. Now, my phone sat on my desk, silent and black. I had changed my number the day I crossed the state line into Nebraska. Only 3 people had the new one: my boss, my doctor, and Rowan, my lawyer. My old number was still active, forwarded to a cloud-based voicemail service that transcribed messages and emailed them to a folder I checked once a week. I had set up a firewall for my life. Unknown numbers were blocked automatically. The silence was not lonely. It was luxurious. It was the sound of a bank account that only had withdrawals I authorized. It was the sound of a weekend that belonged entirely to me. I took a sip of my sparkling water. My assistant, a capable young man named Elias, knocked on my doorframe. "Courier package for you, Ms. Jenkins," he said. It was marked personal, but it came from a law firm in Ohio. I felt a small, cold ripple move through my stomach. It wasn't fear. It was the recognition of a lingering symptom, like an old knee injury acting up before a storm. "Thank you, Elias," I said. "Just set it on the desk." He left. I looked at the envelope. It was thick, creamy paper. The return address was a firm I didn't recognize, likely a strip mall practice that handled everything from DUIs to divorces. I picked up my letter opener. I slit the top of the envelope with surgical precision. Inside was a letter from Kara. It had been forwarded by her lawyer. A loophole they had found to bypass my digital blockade. If you pay a lawyer $50, they can send a letter to anyone. I unfolded the paper. It wasn't a legal demand. It was a handwritten note on lined notebook paper, scanned and attached to a cover letter. Dear Nora, I am writing this because I do not know how else to reach you. Mom cries every day. Dad just sits in the garage and stares at the wall. We are living in a 2-bedroom apartment near the airport. It is loud. The baby wakes up all the time. We do not want your money. I promise. We just want our sister back. We want to be a family again. How can you sleep at night knowing your nephew has never met his aunt? How can you be so cold? We forgive you for what you did. We just want to talk. Please, Nora. Just one phone call. For the sake of the family. Love, Kara. I read the letter twice. I analyzed it the way I analyzed a phishing email at work. I looked for the hooks. I looked for the emotional malware. We forgive you for what you did. There it was. The rewrite of history. In their version of reality. I was the aggressor. I was the villain who had snapped and attacked them without provocation. They had erased the theft, the fraud, the entitlement, and the sledgehammer through the wall. They had absolved themselves of all crimes and graciously offered me a pardon I had not asked for. We do not want your money. That was the lie that made the rest of the text unstable. If they didn't want money, they wouldn't have mentioned the loud apartment. They wouldn't have mentioned the crying mother. Every sentence was a bill, presented for emotional payment. I put the letter down. I waited for the guilt. I checked my pulse. I checked my conscience. I felt nothing. It was strange. For decades, a letter like this would have sent me into a spiral of shame. I would have called them. I would have apologized. I would have sent a check to help with the baby. But the organ that used to process that guilt had been surgically removed on Christmas Eve. I didn't hate Kara. Hate requires passion. Hate requires an active investment of energy. I didn't have the energy to hate her. I simply didn't employ her anymore. She was a former associate who had been terminated for cause. You do not rehire an employee who burned down the warehouse just because they send you a sad Christmas card. I opened my laptop and logged into a secure banking portal. There was one tether I had not cut. One single thread, the education trust. I had established it 5 years ago for my nieces and nephews. It was a substantial sum, enough to cover tuition at any state university. When I severed ties with the adults, I had considered dissolving the trust, but the children were innocent. The baby Kara was using as a bargaining chip had not asked to be born into a family of grifters. I looked at the balance. It was growing. The investments were performing well. I checked the access logs. There had been 12 attempts to withdraw funds in the last 6 months, all of them denied. Reason for denial. Requester, Gordon Jenkins, is not the beneficiary. Reason for denial. Requester, Kara Miller, failed to provide tuition invoice. Reason for denial. Withdrawal for living expenses is prohibited by trust bylaws. They were trying to crack the safe. They were clawing at the money I had set aside for their children's future, trying to consume it in the present. I picked up my office phone and dialed Rowan. I received a letter, I said when he answered. The Let's Be Sisters letter? Rowan asked. I wondered when that would arrive. Did it come with a side order of guilt? It came with a side order of delusion, I said. They say they forgive me. Rowan laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. How generous of them. Do you want to reply? Yes, I said. But not personally. I want you to send a formal response to their attorney. Dictate, Rowan said. I could hear him typing. State clearly that my position has not changed, I said, looking out at the mountains. State that all communication must continue to go through your office. State that I will not agree to any private meetings, phone calls, or video chats. State that if they continue to attempt to contact me directly, I will consider it harassment and seek a restraining order. And the emotional stuff? Rowan asked. The baby? The crying mother? Ignore it, I said. It is irrelevant data. Oh, and Rowan? Remind them that the education trust is irrevocable and managed by an independent trustee. Tell them to stop trying to withdraw cash from it Every failed attempt generates a legal fee that is deducted from the principal. They are literally spending their children's college money by trying to steal it. Brutal, Rowan said. I love it. I will send it out by close of business. Thank you, Rowan. I hung up. I went back to work. I spent the afternoon reviewing a compliance audit for a pharmaceutical company. I found 3 regulatory breaches they had missed. It was satisfying work. It was binary. It was either compliant or it was not. There were no tiers in compliance. Around 4 in the afternoon, I took a break. I made the mistake of opening a social media monitoring tool. I didn't have personal social media anymore. I had deleted my Facebook and Instagram in January, but I had set up keyword alerts for my name. It was a habit from my job. You always monitor the brand. An alert had triggered 3 days ago. I clicked the link. It led to a crowdfunding page. The title was, Help a Family Abandoned by Heartless Millionaire Sister. There was a photo. It was a selfie Kara had taken, likely in their new apartment. She looked haggard, no makeup, holding the baby. My mother was in the background, looking tragically into the middle distance. I read the description. We were kicked out of our home on Christmas week. My sister, a wealthy executive in Chicago, invited us to stay and then changed her mind without warning. She threw us out into the snow with a newborn baby. She shut off our phones. She stole our vehicle. We are struggling to buy diapers while she lives in luxury. Please help us rebuild. They had raised $400. The comments were predictable. Strangers were calling me a monster. They were calling me selfish. They were wishing karma upon me. I looked at the screen. I felt a flicker of the old urge. The urge to defend myself. The urge to comment and say, no, that is not what happened. They broke in. They committed fraud. They were not invited. But I stopped myself. Internet arguments are not courtrooms. They are gladiatorial arenas where the truth does not matter. Only the emotion. If I engaged, I gave them oxygen. If I denied it, I looked defensive. I did something else instead. I opened my encrypted folder. The folder labeled Case File 324. I checked the files. Video evidence 01-4. The recording of them plotting to squat and change the locks. Audio evidence 04.mp3. Derek saying, she is weak. She won't do anything. Doc evidence 02. DF. The police report for Derek's identity theft. Doc evidence 05. PDF. The foreclosure notice on the truck I stopped paying for, proving it was never theirs to begin with. I had the nuclear codes. I could destroy their narrative in 10 seconds. I could post the video of them laughing about stealing my house. I could post the police report showing Derek was a fraudster. But I didn't. I saved a screenshot of their crowdfunding page. I added it to the file. I wasn't going to fight them on Facebook. I wasn't going to fight them in the court of public opinion. I was saving my ammunition for the only venue where facts actually outweighed feelings. I closed the browser. Let them talk, I whispered. Let them tell their story. The more they lie, the deeper the grave. I left the office at 6. I drove home to my apartment in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. It was a modest place, smaller than the Chicago condo, but it was mine. The keys on my ring opened locks that no one else had copied. The air inside smelled of lavender and peace. I made dinner. I read a book. I went to sleep without checking my door 3 times. 2 weeks passed. The silence held. I began to think it was over. I began to think that my message via Rowan had finally broken through their delusion. I began to relax, letting the last knots of tension in my shoulders unwind. Then came Tuesday. I was in a meeting with the CEO of Crown Hollow. We were discussing a merger. It was high level, high stress, and I was in my element. My receptionist interrupted. She looked apologetic. Ms. Jenkins, I am so sorry, she said. There is a man in the lobby. He says he needs to see you personally. He says it is a legal matter. My CEO frowned. Tell him to wait. He says he is a process server, sir. The receptionist said. My stomach dropped. Not from fear, but from the heavy realization of inevitability. Of course, they wouldn't just go away. Narcissists never just go away. They have to escalate. When they lose control, they try to use the system to regain it. "Send him in," I said. I looked at my CEO. "I apologize. This is the family matter I disclosed during my hiring interview." The CEO nodded. "Handle it." A man in a windbreaker walked in. He looked like a retired cop. He didn't look malicious. He looked like a delivery driver bringing a pizza. Except the pizza was a lawsuit. "Nora Jenkins?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "You have been served." He handed me a thick packet of papers bound with a rubber band. He turned and left. I looked down at the cover page. State of Ohio County of Cuyahoga Civil Division Plaintiffs. Gordon Jenkins, Marlene Jenkins, Kara Miller. Defendant, Nora Jenkins. Complaint for damages. 1. Breach of oral contract. 2. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. 3. Unjust enrichment. 4. Constructive eviction. Demand for relief. $2,500,000. I read the number. $2.5 million. They weren't just suing me, they were trying to harvest me. They were trying to extract the lifetime value of my earnings through a court order because they could no longer get it through guilt trips. I looked at the charges. Breach of oral contract. They were claiming that my silence at dinner, my okay, was a binding contract to house them indefinitely. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Because I took back my own house, I felt a strange sensation. A smile was tugging at the corners of my mouth. My CEO was watching me. "Bad news?" he asked. "No," I said, placing the lawsuit on the table. "Actually, it is good news." "How is a lawsuit good news?" "Because," I said, smoothing the cover page, "they just made a tactical error. They dragged this out of the shadows and into a court of law. They think they can cry in front of a judge and get paid." I stood up. I felt taller. I felt sharper. "They forgot one thing," I said, picking up the papers. "In the shadows, they can lie. On the internet, they can lie. But in court, there is a discovery phase, and I have been collecting evidence for this discovery phase for 6 months." I walked to the window and looked out at the mountains. The storm clouds were gathering over the peaks, dark and heavy. "They want a trial," I said softly. "I am going to give them a lesson." I pulled my phone out of the drawer. I turned it on. I dialed Rowan. "Rowan," I said when he answered, "clear your schedule for next month." "What happened?" "They sued me," I said. $2.5 million. Rowan whistled. "They are swinging for the fences." "Let them swing," I said. "I am ready to close the file." The courtroom smelled of lemon floor polish and stale anxiety. It was a sterile, windowless box designed to reduce human drama to case numbers and exhibits. But my family had done their best to turn it into a theater. I sat at the defendant's table next to Rowan Pierce. My spine was straight, my hands folded on the table. I wore a navy blue suit, the same one I wore to board meetings when I had to announce budget cuts. I looked boring. I looked reliable. I looked like the last person on earth who would inflict emotional distress on anyone. Across the aisle, the plaintiff's table was a study in staged victimhood. Marlene was wearing a gray cardigan that was 2 sizes too big, making her look frail and shrunken. She clutched a tissue in her hand, dabbing at eyes that were perfectly dry. Gordon sat hunched over, staring at the floor, playing the part of the broken patriarch. Kara had brought the baby. She sat in the front row of the gallery, just behind her parents, rocking the carrier so the judge would be forced to acknowledge the infant I had supposedly thrown into the snow. Derek sat next to her, wearing a suit that was too tight, his leg bouncing with a nervous energy that vibrated through the floorboards. Their lawyer, a man named Mr. Garris, who had a billboard on the interstate, stood up. He adjusted his tie and walked toward the judge, a stern woman named Judge Vance, who looked like she tolerated fools about as well as she tolerated lactose. "Your Honor," Mr. Garris began, his voice dripping with righteous indignation. "We are here today to address a grievous wrong. My clients, the parents and sister of the defendant, were promised shelter. They were given a verbal contract, a promise made at the sacred family dinner table on Christmas Eve. that they could reside in the defendant's home. Relying on this promise, they vacated their previous residence. They moved their belongings. They trusted their daughter. He pointed a finger at me. I did not blink. And how were they repaid for this trust? Garrus continued, his volume rising. With deceit, with humiliation. They were forcibly removed by armed guards. They were mocked. They were left homeless in the dead of winter. We are seeking damages for breach of contract, constructive eviction, and the severe emotional trauma inflicted by Ms. Jenkins' malicious actions. We are asking for $2,500,000. $2,500,000. It was a number they had pulled out of the air, based on the assumption that I would settle to avoid the embarrassment. They thought I would write a check to make the noise stop. Marlene took the stand first. She cried on cue. She told the court that I had always been difficult, but that on Christmas Eve, I had looked her in the eye and said, "Yes, you can stay." "We just wanted to be together," Marlene sobbed, looking at the jury box, though there was no jury, only the judge. "We are a close family. Nora has just drifted away. We thought this was her way of coming back to us." When it was Rowan's turn to cross-examine, he didn't ask her about her feelings. He didn't ask her about the holiday spirit. He walked to the podium and placed a single USB drive on the clerk's desk. "Your Honor," Rowan said, his voice calm and level. "The defense moves to dismiss the claim of a verbal contract. Furthermore, we intend to prove that the plaintiffs did not enter the property as guests, but as conspirators in a premeditated scheme to claim adverse possession." "Objection," Mr. Garrus shouted. "Character assassination." "Overruled," Judge Vance said, peering over her glasses. "I want to hear where this is going. Mr. Pierce, proceed." Rowan nodded to the clerk. "Please play Exhibit A. This audio was recorded at 6:10 in the evening on December 24th, outside the dining room of the plaintiff's home." The courtroom speakers crackled. Then, the sound was crystal clear. Derek's voice. "She is barely there. It is a $350,000 condo. Wasted space." Marlene's voice. "Just need to get mail delivered there. A utility bill. Once you have mail." "You are a tenant." Gordon's voice. "Change the locks immediately. By the time she lands back in Chicago, she cannot kick a pregnant woman out." The silence that followed the recording was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating silence. Marlene's mouth hung open. She looked at Mr. Garrus, but he was busy shuffling his papers, suddenly finding the grain of the wood table fascinating. That is out of context," Marlene stammered. "We were just talking. Hypothetically." Rowan didn't respond to her. He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, as you can hear, the intent was not to accept an offer of housing. The intent was to establish tenancy through subterfuge and to physically bar the owner from her own property by changing the locks. This destroys the clean hands doctrine required for equitable relief." Judge Vance looked at Marlene. Her expression had shifted from neutral to icy. "You plan to change the locks on your daughter's home while she was out of the country?" We wanted to be safe," Marlene whispered. "Defense calls its next witness." Rowan said, "Actually, we do not need a witness. We have Exhibit B." The screen mounted on the wall flickered to life. It showed the hallway of my condo. The timestamp read December 22nd, 2 days before the verbal contract allegedly took place. The video showed Gordon walking up to my door. It showed him pulling a key from his pocket, a key I had never given him. It showed him entering the unit. Rowan paused the video. "Mr. Jenkins," Rowan said, addressing my father at the plaintiff's table. "Did you or did you not testify in your deposition that you received the key from Nora on Christmas Day?" Gordon stood up. His face was a mask of panic and aggression. I misremembered the date. I had a spare. She gave it to me years ago." "So you admit to entering the property without the owner's knowledge or consent 2 days before you were supposedly invited?" Rowan asked. "I was checking the heat," Gordon yelled. "I am her father. I have a right to check on her house." "You have no legal right to enter a property you do not own," Judge Vance interjected sharply. "Sit down, Mr. Jenkins." "But wait, there is more," Rowan said, and for the first time, he smiled. It was a shark's smile. "We have heard a lot about financial damages today. The plaintiffs claim Nora's actions caused them financial ruin. However, evidence suggests that the plaintiffs were already engaged in financial crimes against the defendant." Rowan held up a document. It was the handwriting analysis report from the State Crime Lab. "This is regarding a credit line opened at Ace Hardware and Lumber in the name of Nora Jenkins," Rowan said. "The application was signed N. Jenkins. However, the IP address used to submit the digital signature traces back to a cell phone registered to Mr. Derek Miller." Derek jumped up. "That is a lie. It was a shared account. She knew about it." "The defendant filed a police report for identity theft on December 28th, Rowan countered. "The fraud investigation is active. The signature expert concluded with 99% certainty that the signature was forged by Mr. Miller. This establishes a pattern of the plaintiffs viewing the defendant not as a family member, but as a financial resource to be exploited without consent." The courtroom was in chaos. Mr. Garris was rubbing his temples, realizing he had taken a case on a contingency fee that he was never going to collect. Marlene was sobbing loudly now, real tears of terror this time. "Your Honor!" Mr. Garris tried to salvage the wreck. Even if there were misunderstandings about keys and credit cards, we are talking about a family. Ms. Jenkins has millions. Her parents are on a fixed income. Her sister has a new baby. Is it not the moral obligation of a child to care for her parents? Is it not cruelty to evict them? We are appealing to the court's sense of humanity." I watched them. I watched Kara rocking the baby faster, trying to make it cry to gain sympathy. I watched Gordon glaring at me with pure hatred. I watched Marlene looking at the judge with pleading eyes. They were using the family card. It was their last currency. It was the card that had worked on me for 20 years. Judge Vance cleared her throat. She picked up her gavel. She didn't bang it. She just held it, testing its weight. "Mr. Garris," the judge said, her voice cutting through the room like a laser. "You are confusing a court of law with a therapy session. There is no law in the state of Ohio, or Illinois, that mandates an adult child must house her capable parents or siblings. There is no law that says family is a defense for trespassing, identity theft, or conspiracy to commit fraud." She looked directly at Gordon and Marlene. "You came into this court claiming you were victims," Judge Vance said. "But the evidence shows you were aggressors. You plotted to steal a home. You forged signatures. You lied in your depositions. Family is a biological fact. Mr. Jenkins, it is not a license to break the law." She looked down at her paperwork. "The claim is dismissed with prejudice," she ruled. "Furthermore, under the frivolous lawsuit statute, I am ordering the plaintiffs to pay the defendants legal fees in the amount of $45,000. Judgment is entered for the defendant." Bang! The gavel hit the wood. The sound was final. It was the sound of a heavy door slamming shut on a lifetime of manipulation. But we weren't done. As the family stood up, shell-shocked, looking like they had just been hit by a sniper they never saw. Rowan stood up one last time. "Your Honor," Rowan said, "one final administrative matter. We have an emergency petition." He walked to the bailiff and handed him a stack of papers. The bailiff walked them over to the plaintiff's table and dropped them in front of Derek. "What is this?" Derek whispered. "That," Rowan said, "is a permanent restraining order, based on the video evidence of breaking and entering, the audio evidence of conspiracy to illegally occupy, and the police report regarding the identity theft. Ms. Jenkins fears for her safety and financial security. You are ordered to stay 500 feet away from her, her home, and her place of employment. Any contact, including phone calls, texts, letters, or social media posts, will result in immediate arrest." Marlene gasped. "A restraining order? Against your own mother?" "Against the people who plotted to steal my home," I said. It was the first time I had spoken in the entire hearing. My voice was quiet. But in the silent courtroom, it carried to the back row. The judge signed the order on the spot. Granted. Bailiff, please escort the plaintiffs out. Ms. Jenkins, you may remain until the hallway is clear. I waited. I sat there for 10 minutes while the bailiff ushered my screaming, crying family out of the building. I waited until the air in the room settled. Then, I thanked Rowan. I thanked the judge. I walked out of the courtroom and down the long marble corridor toward the exit. I pushed through the heavy double doors and stepped out onto the courthouse steps. The air was cold, but the sun was shining. It was that bright, blinding winter sun that makes everything look sharp and high definition. They were there, of course. They were standing on the sidewalk near the parking lot, arguing with their lawyer, who looked like he was trying to fire them as clients right there on the street. Marlene saw me. She broke away from the group. She ran toward the steps, but stopped at the bottom, perhaps remembering the restraining order, perhaps just stopped by the look on my face. "Nora!" she screamed. Her face was twisted with a mixture of grief and rage. "Are you happy? You won. You destroyed us. You took the money. You took the house. You took everything. Are you happy now?" I stopped. I looked down at her. For years, I had asked myself that question. Would I be happy if I said no? Would I be happy if I kept my money? I realize now that happiness wasn't the goal. Happiness is a fleeting emotion. What I felt was something more durable. I felt solid. I felt structurally sound. I walked down 2 steps. I didn't shout. I spoke in a conversational tone, but I knew she heard every word. "I am not happy, Mom," I said. "And I didn't destroy you. You destroyed yourselves when you decided I was an object to be used instead of a person to be loved." "We loved you," she wailed. "We are family. We save each other." "No," I said, shaking my head slowly. "You don't save each other. You drown together." And I finally realized that if I didn't let go of the rope, you were going to pull me down with you. I adjusted my scarf. "I didn't take anything from you," I said. "I just stopped giving you things that weren't yours. I stopped saving the people who were trying to drown me." I turned away. "Nora!" she screamed one last time. "Where are you going?" I didn't answer. I didn't look back. I walked toward my car, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the pavement. I was going to the airport. I had a flight back to Denver. I had a job where I was respected. I had a home that was safe. I had a life that belonged, fully and completely, to me. They wanted to take the roof over my head, so I gave them the sky. They wanted my assets, so I gave them their own debts. They wanted a reaction, so I gave them a verdict. It wasn't revenge. Revenge is emotional. This was simply physics. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. They had pushed. And finally, the world had pushed back. Consequences. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a long journey for Nora, but she finally found her freedom. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening from the US, the UK, Vietnam, or somewhere else? Please let me know in the comments below so we can connect. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Helena Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video reach more people who need to hear that it is okay to stand up for yourself. See you in the next story.